Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast, episode 62.
Yeah.
Pastor Mike is leaving the room. Pastor Mike didn't start the timer. I'm not restarting. We're rolling with that. This is all staying in.
Nice.
This is like a nice look behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Usually Pastor Mike doesn't have to start the timer.
Our producer
is too comfortable.
Too comfortable in my study chair back in the corner.
I feel like we should start doing the podcast from those chairs. Why are we sitting over here
I know
uncomfortably?
some people who do podcasts who do.
Yeah.
You know, we should.
Would you still like... By the way, Pastor Mike, my name is David. Pastor Mike is with me as always. Thanks for being here for the Grow Podcast. Anyway, all that stuff aside, would you be upset if I fell asleep during the Grow Podcast?
Thanks for your engagement.
That chair
today.
looks really comfortable,
It
and
is.
I am tired. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to go over there, and you just kind of wing it. It'd be a good test. You know, when we first started the podcast, it was, hey, it'd be really cool to have it conversational. But maybe the podcast is way better if I'm not here.
Are you saying you're kicking the producer out of the chair?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely don't want to go take a nap in it while he's still sitting in it. That is not what I want to do. It looks way less comfortable that way.
Let me just apologize up front for all of our conversation here at the top. That makes absolutely no sense, but
You like it.
yes, I do.
Well, I've been gone for a little while, so I don't know if I remember how to do anything in my job anymore. So
haven't recorded one of these in a few weeks.
No, yeah, we got ahead.
You were gone. I was gone.
Yeah, you had some travels around. We went opposite directions.
We did. I went west. You went east.
Mine was
I
more.
went further.
I had lakes. You had oceans.
Yep.
I'm more of a lake person. You're
I thought
Montana.
lakes and
Are you more of a
oceans.
lake person or an ocean person?
I don't know.
You've had both Montana and California
I'm
and
kind
Minnesota.
of a wilderness person. Whatever I can do.
That's a cop-out. You have to answer. You have to pick one. God comes down and says, hey, Pastor Mike, I'm going to get rid of all oceans or all lakes. Which one do you save?
We're in trouble. There's probably more enjoyment sitting at a lake because there tends to be fewer people.
Also a good answer. I like that answer.
That would be the main motivation there.
Let us know in the comments.
Not that I don't like people, but sometimes I just want to be where there are no people.
Michael and I won't take it personal that you're currently with us and you're wishing that you weren't with people. But let us know in the comments if you like lakes or oceans more.
That was a weird question.
I feel like that's the most important question I will ask today on the Grow
Podcast.
Good.
We're here to help you grow.
Well, no, we are actually going to talk about some things. We just wrapped up our Be the Church series. Well,
no, we have one more week.
Sort of wrapped up.
The teaching is all wrapped up.
Yeah.
On Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
And then next week, which if you're listening the week before, September 11th, 2022, is our Vision Sunday and our celebration. And we get to celebrate 59 years this year of ministry.
We have more podcast episodes than years of New Hope.
I know it.
Should we stop? Should we just do one podcast a year?
That's it. We're just going to do that.
One really long podcast every year.
We get to talk about some pretty cool things that have happened. Talk about where God is taking us next and some of the specific things. And,
I'm excited for that one. Make sure you join us live for that one. If you can be in Williston in person, that's great. If you join us at New Hope here, join us live for that one, if at all possible, because that'll be a really cool one that I think everyone's going to enjoy.
And if you're part of the Tioga campus, actually by the time this episode comes out, you will have already heard the Vision message because we did Vision Sunday on Labor Day weekend there because they're engaged in serving the community on.
And you got to do it in person.
Which was there very cool. In person.
Yep. Or you will get to do it in person.
Yeah.
But yes.
It's hard.
That's always cool when you get to go. I mean, obviously when it's at our normal time, it doesn't work. You preach at our main campus where we broadcast from. But because it's in the afternoon, you get to go. Yeah. Is that like you've preached here for, how long has this building existed for?
In its current, about 8 years.
So when the first couple times you preached in Tioga, was that like a weird experience to still be preaching at New Hope to your church, but in a completely different setting, smaller, totally different style, you know? I feel like that would throw me off the first couple times. Just
it is a little bit different.
I mean, not that you just go up there and you're a robot when you preach, but I'm sure there's a rhythm to a Sunday morning for you after however many years as a senior pastor. Maybe not. I don't know.
And you just, you know, you want to connect with those who are in the room, not just, you know, repeat.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You know,
right.
Phrases and words that even though they have meaning, but you want to be able to connect. And it's Tioga is an amazing group of people, and it's fun to watch them.
Yeah, they are.
And they're growing. I mean, this summer's been fun to watch.
It's a cool place. I haven't. It's been over a year since I've been able to get out there. I like going out there. It's fun. So we love all you Tioga people. Let's talk about what we're going to dive into today, because we're gonna run out of time just talking about preaching and whatever, lakes and oceans, and I don't know what happened. Like I said, I've been gone for a while, Pastor Mike. We kind of, one of your big questions at the close of your message this last week was, how big is your God? Yeah. And do you want to talk about like the 40 days of prayer at all on this, or do you feel like you've touched on that?
Well, now that you brought it up, we can, So we challenge, and the only time we're actually going to talk about it will be with this weekend. So along with this podcast, we just invite anyone to join us in 40 days, and there's 3 specific prayers we talked about. Go back and listen to the weekend teaching on New Hope here online, and if you're with us in Williston, we were outside for that. And then we handed out prayer cards for 40 days online. We have digital ones we sent out, and just say, join us in prayer for these specific things for 40 days. And one of the fun things with that is we're all going to miss a day, right?
Sure.
In the 40 days. Maybe you won't. You looked at me like I won't.
Oh yeah, I'm so perfect in my prayer
It doesn't
life.
have to be 40 like contiguous days. If you miss a day, just the next time you just mark it. But let's commit together to pray 40 days over the next period of time for those specific things, because the church moves forward on the knees of the saints and followers of Jesus. So I would love it if you're interested in that. Go back, watch that message, let us know. We can send you a digital card so that you've got it and can mark it digitally or even print it out.
Yeah, you can go to newhopehere.com/40 days as well. And
you know it.
You can find it on there. Every once in a while I know something. I don't remember how to do this podcast, but I remember that hyperlink apparently. You talked about David over the weekend.
David with an I.
Well,
not David with an E.
You know, maybe you translated it incorrectly from the ancient Hebrew, and there were no vowels in ancient Hebrew, so maybe it was an E. You don't know. But so you're obviously David and Goliath. Like that's the big, real.
It's not what we talked about this weekend.
No,
but that's
where
a lot of where we think about.
So when we think about David, we think about Goliath. And today we're going to talk about facing giants, and obviously that's the story of a giant in the Bible that we know. So we all have giants. How do we face them? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
So let me throw the question back at you. I did not warn you this was coming. No. Yeah.
Now it's my turn to slide out of frame if you're watching the video podcast.
As you reflect, it doesn't have to be anything current, but what would you call as giants that name as giants that you've faced?
Oh,
you can choose to be as vulnerable or as non-vulnerable as you want.
I mean, we've talked about my dealing with depression after losing a very good friend and 2 very good friends. So that would definitely be a big one. I've had, like, in my career, there's been a few as well. I think just like complete unknown of what's next, where I thought I had, a path, and then it was gone and I had nothing and I didn't know what was next. And so I think that was another pretty big one. I'm sure I could. We don't need me to list 40 of them. What about you?
I mean, there have been positive ones. We've talked about there's leadership challenges. We were talking before we got on the Grow podcast about the challenges with our Williston building. That's been a giant over years, and we're getting close to slaying that giant. There have been personal ones, depression as well, anxiety. One giant for me over the years has been dealing with forgiveness and resentment in certain relationships, and then there's always faith kinds of things, big challenges and and problems that we face. One of the things that I wanted to touch on as we talk about giants is God will never, and there's a couple ways I can say this, and I've been trying to toy with the best way of saying this, but I'll say it maybe the most familiar way, and then I'll turn a little bit. But whatever God has called you to, he will always prepare you for. So we think about David. It wasn't like David just showed up.
Right.
And suddenly was, oh, I have a giant. No, he'd never faced a giant before, But when you really dig deep into the story, he didn't just pick up one rock. He picked up how many rocks? Do you remember the story? 5. Do you know the reason we think why?
Because it's more than 4. He expected to miss 4 times.
And the Bible names it. Goliath had brothers.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so we wonder as you look at that, is why, not only was he well prepared, that was probably the most reason, but it's like, I may not just have to face him. So he was preparing for that. But I think as we, it's a nice way to say it, whatever God calls you to, he prepares you for. But whatever your giant is, we kind of feel like we're unprepared for it. But in reality, God will not call you to face anything that he has not in some way equipped you and prepared you for. But I think there are things we can learn from David's story that we can pay attention to. And you say, why do we need to do it? Well, this may not be encouraging, but the more we say yes to God's preparation, the more he'll call us to and the more we get to be part of. You say, does that mean we may have to face bigger giants? Yes. But, Goliath wasn't the last giant in David's life. Right. The guy went on from there to have the king, the father of his best friend, try and hunt him down and kill him for how many years? And then he became king over a nation with one of the most ferocious, fearsome nations wanting to destroy them, the Philistines. And then, he had one of his own sons turn against him, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's not like, he just faced one giant in his life. Right. This just happened to be a
literal giant.
Yeah, a literal giant. So I think there are some things. There's a lot of things, and I've heard a lot of teaching with David's story, but there's 4 things in particular that I think David's story helps us with that we can begin to pay attention. Because on the Grow podcast, we always talk about growth begins with our
next step.
Oh, you got it. With our next step. So
I've heard it 61 times.
There you go. And I'm going to give us these right off the top, and then we can kind of unpack those. You can choose which one we want to talk about first. Diligence, submission. I'm going to guess that's not the first one you want to talk about.
We'll put that one in the end. We'll see if we have time.
Effort and experience. Diligence, submission, effort, and experience. 4 things that were part of David's life long before he hit that valley and long before he picked up that slingshot in front of Goliath. So, diligence, submission, effort, experience. Which one do you want to talk about
I feel
first?
like now we should do submission first. Let's
submission.
Make sure we've got all the time needed to talk about submission.
And actually, in my notes as I prepared, that's the one I actually have the least number of notes on. But think about this. Before David became king, before he faced even the giant, he served both as a shepherd and as a harpist for King Saul. When he came before King Saul to say, I want to go to the giant, the king didn't look at him and say, oh, there's a great warrior. He thought, oh, there's the guy who plays music for me. And yet, when you read earlier in First Chronicles, one of the things David knew was Samuel, who was the leader of Israel for years, had, by God's direction, anointed David already to become the next king. Now, I think I can speak for most of us when we know, like if you have whatever job you have right now, and someone comes and says, hey, here's a job for you. You're going to have more responsibility. You're going to have more influence. You're going to have more money. It's going to be more fun, but you don't get to have it for 10 years. You have to stay in the job you are. Most of us, it's hard for us to stay engaged for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He knew that God had already called him to do that, and yet we watch him. I mean, part of it, he came from the field as a shepherd to the battle.
Right, just bringing
lunch,
food for his brothers.
So I think one of the things for us to be aware of up front is just in God's preparation is to make sure we aren't, one, running ahead of God, saying, all right, God, you told me, now I'm going to fix it. I mean,
which David had numerous opportunities to do.
Yeah, all kinds of opportunities.
He could, so many times he could have either just killed Saul outright or
later on
started an uprising against him, tried to speed up his, ascent to the throne. Like you're saying, it'd be hard to wait 10 years.
And we see other examples in Scripture of people who did run from God. Here in a couple of weeks, in the greatest story ever told, we're going to look at Abraham, the guy who God calls to build a nation, promised to have a child, and his wife goes, after 10 years of the promise not being fulfilled, goes, well, let's do this for God. Says, go sleep with our maidservant. And Abraham, being a guy, is like, oh,
fine.
Fine. Instead of that submission. But David submitted not only to God's leadership, but to other people, that if he's called to be king, would he really? And so the question, I think, for us is, are we submitting to the place God has us right now? So he can prepare us for for the giant he wants to face in the future. There's submission.
Let's do diligence next.
Diligence might be both my favorite and unfavorite. Pastor Stephen Furtick said, unfortunately, many people separate spirituality from skill. What's dangerous is that God deposits gifts within us. We just talked about spiritual gifts. That we may never develop. What you are is God's gift to you. What you become is your gift to God. I love that. What you are is God's gift to you, but what you become is your gift to God. In other words, God gave you personality. He gave you a gift, but he also gave you the ability to develop it. So a lot of us, we just kind of float. And how many times do we watch people? There's always got to be a sports illustration. Here it is, a basketball illustration. You've probably watched extremely talented, because there's people with talent and skill, and sometimes they don't come together, right? And they rely on their talent. And they can go far. A very talented person can go far on their talent, but there's always a natural ceiling built in. Unless they start developing it. And so whoever you are, you've got to develop it. Our gift is our responsibility to grow and develop. David's leadership gift grew. He was a great leader, and people flocked to follow him. Why? Because he understood how to lead. How did he understood how to lead? It goes back to what we just talked about. He understood what it means to submit. He understood what it means to follow. And when you understand that, you can lead well. So let's go back to what we talked about last week? Our spiritual gifts. I went back. You're doing the math, wasn't it?
It was last week.
When we record, sometimes out of order, and a few weeks apart, it messes with us. But what gift has God given you, and what are you doing to develop it? If it's leadership, develop it. Romans chapter 12, the first about 10 verses talk about who we need to be and list spiritual gifts. The last half of Romans chapter 12 actually begins to unpack how to develop things, and it says, comfort those who mourn, celebrate with those who celebrate, and actually coaches you. And in fact, every place spiritual gifts are listed, Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, so just at least those two places, so if your gift is leadership, then lead well. If your gift is administration, then administrate well, whatever that is. So diligence, put the effort in. The reason David was able to take Goliath down with one rock was not because he'd never picked up a slingshot before. In fact, we find out he'd killed a bear and killed a lion. He knew exactly how to do this. And when you look at the ancient world, it wasn't like slingshot was a toy weapon. Slingshots in the ancient armies, they were deadly, extremely deadly. And Abraham was extremely deadly. So he basically was bringing a cannon to a sword fight. And, we kind of look at it. He brought a slingshot to a sword fight. He didn't have to get close to Goliath. He actually outgunned him even as a little kid. So diligence.
Let's go. You used the word effort 5 times in talking about diligence. So I feel like natural transition.
They're probably twins. Okay. Diligence is the choice to develop. Effort is the energy we put in. And I've heard several leaders say it, and I'll summarize it. If we're going to do something for God or claim we're doing something for God, then why shouldn't we do it well? Or it should be good. Martin Luther once said, "The maid who sweeps her kitchen is doing the will of God just as much as the monk who prays, not because she may sing a Christian hymn as she sweeps, but because God loves clean floors." I love Martin Luther. The Christian shoemaker does his Christian duty not by putting little crosses on the shoes, but by making good shoes. Isn't that interesting? We tend to think, we're doing our Christian duty when we stamp, let everybody know it's Christian. What if it's just by doing things well? Doing things well. God is interested in good craftsmanship. Notice, God anointed David as a talented musician and spent the time and energy, but he spent the time and energy to grow as a harpist. All those hours out in the field, he practiced. God blessed him with opportunities he needed to become the king that God called him to be because he learned to be leader. He was a great king. We talked about submission. Also, before he ever became king, he'd spent years leading warriors in the desert who were it says they were some of the most unruly people to lead, and yet they loved to follow him. He learned to lead. So he put the effort in. He was positioned to play the harp for Paul because he was first positioned to play when no one was looking. So diligence and effort. Diligence is about making the choice to do it. Effort is about intentionally giving the energy to do it. And then finally, experience. Don't minimize little experiences. David fought other battles first. Long before he went before Goliath. Yep. What we want to I love this statement. I don't know where I got it, but I wrote it down somewhere. What we want to get past, God is often using to prepare. And, I've thought about that even in some things lately in my own life. It's like, God, can I just get past this?
Right.
Can we just get this roof done? Can we, on the building, can we just get this instead of, oh, wait, what are you doing to prepare me in the middle of this as we do this? And I just think, part of just, and I've told a little bit of the story, and I'll tell a little bit of it, as I look at even becoming the lead pastor of New Hope in Williston, North Dakota, I go back and look at the story and how God walked me through it, not only family ties to the area and visiting the area when I was a kid, so I was very familiar with the area and the region, but then each stop along the journey. So my first pastorate was in rural farmland, Kansas, not a place I would have chosen. God chose it for me. And I just learned so much about being a pastor. I learned so much about, because it's just different culture. Went from there to one of the most artistic, creative, cutting-edge churches in the country at the time, and did crazy stuff and artistic stuff in Michigan. And along the way, I was then able to be part of thinking about how to reach lost people using the most relevant tools that we have that a lot of people write off.
Sure.
Then from there was invited to plant a church in California, of all places, where everybody's leaving, it feels like right now, in California, of all places, no promise of a salary, and learned how to plant a church. And each one of those ways, prepared for what was coming next, not just leading in rural North Dakota and oil country and volatile country, but then leading a church planting movement.
The first 3 we talked about, submission, diligence, and effort, seem to be related to like intentionality on my part, whereas the experience one, like those are happening to me. So how can I make sure to be intentional in those moments?
I think part of it is don't try and rush out of those moments. It's like, and I look back and I'm kind of ashamed of the fact. So my time in, rural Southwest Kansas, there were moments it's like, I just want out of here. I've been to rural
Southwest Kansas. I get that.
And even I have friends who, they're in Williston right now. It's like, I just want some place where there's more. Don't rush out of some place, even if you have opportunity to, until God says you are ready to go.
Yeah.
Wherever it is, whether it's a place or a moment or attention or a job, just because you have opportunity doesn't necessarily mean that you have been fully prepared in that moment. Yeah.
That was good, Pastor Mike. Do you have a next step for us this week?
I think next step for this week is just more reflection.
Okay.
You know, as you look at those 4 things and where you're at right now, what do you need to work on? What do you need to work on? Diligence, effort, experience, submission.
What if I need to work on all 4 of them?
We probably all need to work on all 4
okay,
of them.
good. I'm glad it's not just me. Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. You mentioned it earlier, but we say it every week on the Grow podcast, except I think I missed it that one week. Growth always starts with the next step. We'll say it twice this week. That way we cover from that week that we missed. But so let's make sure that we take that next step this week. And again, if you're watching or listening to this podcast before September 11th, make sure you join us next week for Vision Sunday, live if possible. It's going to be a really, really cool Sunday as we kind of wrap up this Be the Church series and then head into what we're going to get into in the fall. So thank you for being here. Make sure you subscribe, whether you're joining us on. So I don't know if you know this yet, Pastor Mike. We finally got the video working on Apple Podcasts.
Oh, do we?
Which then murdered our Spotify podcast. So that the Spotify one was down and it's back up now.
Okay.
Barring any other unforeseen issues.
That explains a few texts I got. Where did my Spotify podcast went? Okay.
Yep. So we've remedied that problem. So if you are normally a Spotify listener, we're sorry. At least the most recent episodes and then all the ones going forward should be back up.
Okay.
But now the video is available on Apple Podcasts as well. Not just so if you normally listen to us on Apple, you can see the video right in the podcast app. But make sure you subscribe wherever you're at. If you're on Spotify, you're going to need to resubscribe, however.
Okay.
Because it's technically a different podcast now. Some of you might be really smart out there and had a different workaround for us, but as far as we could tell, that was our only option. So resubscribe if you listen on Spotify. Subscribe if you normally join us on YouTube or anything like that. That way you get notified when the new episodes go live. They go out every Monday at 6 a.m. Pastor Mike wakes up at 6 a.m. every Monday to listen to the Grow podcast.
Yes.
You may have heard our producer laughing for that one, but we love all of you, New Hope family, and we will see you next week.